Hey neighbor, welcome back to Beyond ARTV. My name is John and it's time for another episode of the Dear John Q&A, the only Q&A show where you can get me taking uncomfortably long sips out of cups from Dave & Buster's.
I'm a driver, I'm a winner. Things are gonna change, I can feel it.
Enough messing around. Today we've got a very interesting question from viewer JJ O'Connell about changing styles. When is it appropriate to do so? With selling out, there's so much stuff that falls under that umbrella of discussion, so we're going to get to as much of it as we can. If you want to be a part of this Q&A series in the future, I take detailed viewer questions related to music that you guys leave in the comment section, starting with Dear John so that I can find you, and then I answer in video form if I feel it needs more context or explanation. If you enjoy this episode, then do me a favor, leave a like on it, join the discussion in the comments, be neighborly to each other, and subscribe if you happen to be new. Dear John, what's an appropriate time for an artist to change style or genre? What's the difference between an artist being sick of doing one genre versus, quote, selling out? That's a fantastic question. Thank you so much for that. I can't wait to tackle this one because while there have been a few rays of light that have shone through as I voiced my opinion on some of these things, at least in a small manner, this is the first time that I've been able to tackle this question head on, the likes of selling out. And we're gonna start with, before we get to the big old S word there, we're gonna talk about when I feel it's the best time for an artist or a band to start shaking up their core sound and bringing in some new styles or genres or influence. Changing style can be a very frustrating thing as a music fan, but we also have to remember that it's not up to us, and as many people have always said, it's our job to listen to and maybe enjoy or get the most out of the album that we're given, not the one that we were hoping for. I think that albums always have these expectations, sometimes unrealistic, and in the ever-changing state of streaming versus album sales declining and people mainly just checking out, it seems like, singles or EPs or shuffling through albums and not getting the full experience, obviously things have evolved. And a lot of artists will start to try a lot of different sounds within one album, and that can make for a very confusing listen, something that gives you a bit of whiplash syndrome. It's not always a fun experience, but it's an interesting time because so many voices can be heard. I do feel that the debut album is always a bit of an anomaly because the artist or the band has generally been working towards that moment for their whole life. You get one debut album and there's your moment. You had forever to work on it. And then if you got that record deal the first time around, well, they want to start the gears turning on album number 2 very quickly. And a lot of times the sophomore slump is a term that gets used for a reason. Album number 2 can be very difficult, but there's been so many great artists and bands that have circumvented that. I would say that somebody like Lorde did put out something amazing in the form of Pure Heroine, but she topped herself with melodrama. System of a Down did it. Obviously, their self-titled versus Toxicity. I mean, it's kind of close, but still. There's a lot of different bands that have done it. The band that are on my shirt right now, Wolf Alice, put out a really solid sophomore effort, and obviously it's always up for debate, but from Nirvana to Foo Fighters to Tool to Alice in Chains to Queens of the Stone Age and Fall Out Boy, there's been a lot of bands that managed to actually not fall into the sophomore slump. They doubled down on their sound that they built the first time around, maybe why people fell in love with them, and maybe even did it slightly even better. After album number 2, though, I feel that that's generally when the band starts to question, what is our core sound going to be? Do we continue to shapeshift or do we just stay in the same lane? Now, obviously, if we stay in the same lane, people are going to say, well, you just keep repeating yourself. You're following the Nickelback formula, if you will. You just keep making the same songs that sound alike. And nobody really wants that, at least not most people. But then, on the other lane, if you swerve too far this way, then maybe you're going to be making songs that alienate the fans. Album 3 can be extremely tricky. But also, a lot of times, especially if there's been a slow rise to fame, album 3 can be the one where you really get it right. Okay, computer, Radiohead, anyone? Here's what I personally feel. I think album 3 is the perfect time to start punching at the corners of what maybe confined you or limited you to writing a certain way. Not to say that the first 2 records probably weren't fantastic, it obviously differs artist to artist, but album 3, that can start to feel a little bit, cliche cliche sometimes, especially if they keep writing the same thing. Look to a band like State Champs. They essentially made the same album again, even more generic and doubling down on the pop punk aspect on 2018's Living Proof. It was nowhere near as fun as, say, Around the World and Back, which was already a step down from the finer things. And then on the other hand, you have bands that can turn it out and do it so well. Songs for the Deaf, Queens of the Stone Age, what a third album right there. And it was because they separated what made them Queens of the Stone Age from their former band Caius, and obviously the distinct stylings of their debut and even Rated R. That record is definitely a testament to what a third album can be, but despite what I've said about a third album being a good time to kind of punch out and start to experiment, I think album 4 is the ideal moment when you really come to fruition as an artist, that you've won people over and you can keep them hooked and energized and excited and enthused about what you're going to do next, even though it is slightly different. Albums 3 and 4 have been the falling off point for a lot of bands, and that's very unfortunate. I think a lot of people point to The Killers as a prime example of saying, hey, Hot Fuss and Sam's Town, I mean, there was a lot of buzz around both of those, but Day and Age, nowhere near as good. And I would agree with that. It's unfortunate. It's not to say that Day and Age is awful, but album 3 and 4 can start to be really tough. Oasis have actually spoken about this at length. I would say notably Noel Gallagher has said that, you go out and you start playing these songs on your first album, even your second album, and you're writing songs for the people. But after that, you start to lose touch because there's so many faces and you don't really know what you're writing for or who you're writing about at that point. And that's why album 3 and 4, especially if you found fame as a band, can be so tricky. So I feel that album 4 is so important to nail down and do, not only in the style of your own popularity that blew you up in the first place, but also to bring in something new that does feel fresh so that you recharge your own batteries as the artist. The cycle really does always repeat itself, and there's obvious exceptions to the rules, and there's sometimes bands that just remain incredibly consistent, but when you see a band like that, hold the hell on to them, because that can be quite rare to actually find a band or an artist that's not flubbing it every album or two. Just look at Weezer's output. My God, what a discography that is just a disarray, a very disorganized mess. So if I'm saying that album 4 is the right time to start pushing out your avenues, expanding your borders, doing whatever you have to do to flex your creativity, but also remain true to yourself, then also that begs the question, what's the difference between expanding your sound because you want to creatively challenge yourself and because you're sick of just doing one thing? I know so many metalcore bands or even pop punk or alternative groups just get sick of doing the whole rock thing. At least that's what they claim. It can be frustrating as fans, but also it's not always bad. I know that that's hard to believe and accept, but there have been some interesting exceptions, some anomalies like Paramore or even Bring Me the Horizon, where the experimenting can actually lead to some really unique and crazy songs that I don't feel are the definition of selling out at all. Sellouts, it's the word that everybody loves to throw around, but nobody actually knows what it means really. They could say selling out because a band incorporated a product placement into a music video, or they actually have a record deal with a budget. It was a lot harsher, I would say, in like the 80s or 90s, especially in the punk movement. If a band got a record deal, then they got kicked out of the small clubs. It happened to Green Day. Gilman Street, they were banned for the longest time, and they were one of the bands that put that venue on the map. Obviously not just them, but it was looked down upon when you would see money coming to an artist. And I think that's changed a lot. In fact, it's kind of gone in the opposite direction. It's over-corrected because now flexing on them is what it's all about. To me, the difference between selling out and actually expanding your sound because you wanted to challenge yourself as an artist is quite obvious. Listen to the songs. What exactly are they talking about? Is there still some sort of integrity intact as they have added maybe electronic textures, or maybe something that feels more hip-hop inclined if they were a rock artist? It can get confusing to accept as a fan, and I totally get that. But also, I feel that when you put in your headphones and you turn up the speakers and you listen to the music for what it is, it's generally pretty blatant when it's just a sellout move. And I'm not here to necessarily call out specific acts. You guys have probably seen my channel and you know that I call them on the bullshit when it feels like a commercial move. but there's also times where it's not commercially motivated. I mean, I brought up Bring Me the Horizon, and honestly, if they were commercially motivated, then they're not doing a very good job, because Amo tanked on the charts compared to That's the Spirit, and it was much more, I don't know, different, and some people thought it was a sellout. When money's on the table, who exactly knows what an artist is going to do or what their motivations for it are? Maybe they want to put on a bigger and better set design, and sometimes that means having to win over new fans. At least they might feel that way. And it's unfortunate because the chase to stay relevant in this day and age, it's like you always have to be releasing something. And again, that dates back to my quality over quantity video, and that's something that's not at all being honored in this day and age, in the streaming era, if you will. So many bands have gotten on board with the annoying marketing. It can feel very tacky. Even my favorite band, Green Day, have jumped on board to that. And I would love to know what you guys think. What is selling out and what is changing their sound for some sort of artistic value? What's the difference, and can you hear it when you listen to your favorite artist? Do you see commercial motivations, or do you genuinely feel that they're just trying to flex some sort of creative muscle? Join the discussion, drop a like on the video, and if you want to get involved in a future episode of Dear John, then leave a question down below, starting with Dear John, so I can find it. That's a wrap on this episode, neighbor. If you happen to be new here, then please hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so you get notified when I upload future videos. If you want to catch the last episode of Dear John, the last discussion that I had with you guys, then tap right here, or tap here for another recent video. All of my social media accounts, including my Patreon, if you want to support the channel, can be found down below, and I'll see you soon for more on Beyond ARTV.